I think we do just such a terrible injustice sometimes of talking about innovation, and it's usually the corporations that do this because they're always talking about big ideas. Like, are we investing in ideas that are big enough? And they create this enormous standard for what a big enough idea is. Except for those of us, and all of us in this room that have actually innovated in our career, we know that when you start something, you have no idea how big it actually could or may not be. And so a lot of people will challenge me on this concept, and they're like, no, we can kind of like see the future enough. We know that there's going to be an AI and a VR and a driverless cars component in our future. And I would still very much push back on that. And so I'll give you kind of 3 examples, all of which I've met the founders that I think are just extraordinary when you hear their earliest story. So the first example is Uber. And Uber is almost, by the media, they're always credited with inventing the sharing economy, with building a public utility, by being one of the fastest growing private companies of all time. But at its core, the original Uber app auto-dialed a black car company and gave a location coordinate. I'm sorry, that is not very innovative. Travis didn't want to interrupt his date. He's like, this would be a great solution to have. And they were lucky enough to launch in the city in the world with perhaps the worst taxi service in the world. So their bar for competing was incredibly low. And it was only from there that they then, in like the 3rd or 4th iteration, figured out this idea of location coordinate, figured out the idea that the driver should be compensated for, figured out that they could use different routes. They stole the entire peer-to-peer model from Lyft. But at its core, the beginning of that business was almost impossible to see how big it could be. One of my favorite things that I found is you can actually Google their original pitch deck, where they say the entire size of the market in the US is $2 billion. It's hard to believe that today when they're a $70 billion company. Second example I'll give you is one of my favorite Canadian companies, which is Cirque du Soleil, just because I think they are so imaginative. And they forced me to read this book in my MBA that was called Blue Ocean Strategy. And they described the success of Cirque du Soleil this way. They said, Guy looked at the world of circus, and he saw that there was 70% of the costs of running a circus were associated somehow with animals. Either taking care of the animals, maintaining the animals, moving the animals, training the animals, all these things. And so Guy imagined a world, a blue ocean, where you could create the same revenue for a circus, but take out 70% of the cost structure. And that's how he created Cirque du Soleil. And this is what the book says. But if you meet Guy, and if you ask him the question, he'll look at you and he'll be like, animals? He's like, not once in my 10 years, my first 10 years of building Cirque, did I ever think of having an animal. He's like, here's what I knew. I knew I was a fire breather. I knew that then there's 2 of us buskers, we got paid better. I knew as our outfits got crazier, people liked it more. As the music got crazier, people liked it more. I literally leveraged everything on my first 10 shows. So that means at any point if one show had failed, I would have lost the whole company. And he's like, at the time, I had no idea how big this can be. And so the final example I'll leave you with is the company that's now the largest hotel chain in the world by number of room nights booked a year, which is Airbnb. And so most people don't know the founding story of Airbnb also had nothing to do with the sharing economy. The founders of Airbnb basically said, look, if we look at the world today, and this is in market size, there are like business travelers, let's call it this many people. And of business travelers, half of those business travelers go to conferences. And of the half that go to conferences, some people will want to go to a conference where the official hotel is sold out. So maybe like this many people really want to go to a work conference where the hotel's sold out. And of the people that really want to go to this conference, people would be so willing to go to this conference, they would be willing to stay on someone else's air mattress, it's like this big, hence the name Airbnb. And with that tiny little market, and it took them almost 3 years to get any traction on that idea, it was literally they figured out their big insight after starting that was that people were not only willing to rent their secondary residence, like their place in Collingwood, they were actually willing to rent their primary residence if there was enough controls around who that was and how that person was rated and how I could find them. But again, it didn't start with the idea that they were going to be the largest hotel chain in the world. It started incredibly, incredibly small.